Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast by Bangalore International Centre, bringing you conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Women in your life will stretch themselves thin to make your life more comfortable, while we do not necessarily expect the men in your life to do the same thing. And this is something that you and I always talk about, right? What is the most difficult probably act of feminist rebellion within the household? Taking a nap.
Right, yeah. Hanging out. Yeah, not having a plan, right.
And there's this whole topic about, we have seen our mothers do it all, right? We've seen our mothers work outside of the house. And you and I will always say that there's no such thing as a non-working mother, right? Every mother is a working mother. But what we have never seen is a relaxed mother, right? A woman at leisure is still such a radical concept within the household that's not just scrambling around, oh, there's only 2 more things to pick up from the floor, there's only 1 more meal to manage or to cook, but really a woman or a mother or a parent who is just doing nothing.
Parenting can be one of those challenges in life that never has any right answers. How do you enable another person to live up to their full potential in a healthy way while being mindful of their individuality and personality, as well as taking care of yourself? Some have called it the ultimate crash course in adulting. A large number of us have come to understand equity, equality, and feminism later in life and are finding ways to live them now, including in the way we speak and work with our children. What does feminist parenting look like? We seek answers in this 3-part podcast series of BIC Talks. In this mini-series, we have Educator and Head of CSR, DXC India, Gauri Bhure Roy, and Tena Pick, Social Impact Consultant and founder of Project Kal, taking us through the journey of feminist parenting. Gauri and Tena are co-founders of the Feminist Parenting Collective, Parenthesis India.
Hi, my name is Tena, and I'm an imperfect mother and an imperfect feminist.
Hi, my name is Gauri, and I am a work in progress, both as a mother and a feminist.
So, Gauri, let's start today with the most obvious question. Why feminist parenting? Isn't equal parenting or equitable parenting enough? Why do we have to use the dreaded F words?
I feel like gender issues are so at the heart of parenting. And first of all, I have to start by saying the number of women we've met through the year, every time we did a circle, who said, hey, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equal rights. I think consent matters. Oh, I think there should be equitable labor for men and women. And I often feel like, well, should we break it to them? That maybe that is, you are a feminist, or at least a little bit of a feminist.
I think that it's really important to kind of figure out where the discomfort with the word feminist comes from. And where the discomfort comes from is from basically patriarchal structures doing a really good job of alienating us from the terminology and making it feel like it's something combative, scary, radical. And I do believe that it should be radical in its transformative power, but definitely not alienating or exclusive or scary for people to identify with. But the messaging that we're getting behind just the word feminist has been very heavily influenced by how the patriarchal structures and media, being one of them, presents feminism to us. And I think that one thing that you and I always try to be very open about is that there's no one way to be a feminist and there's no perfect way to be a feminist.
And, the fact also is that heterosexual marriage is an inherently feminist institution. So I think some of it is, as human beings, we are very complex and we can have investments, emotional and otherwise, in institutions that we may not wholly agree with. And perhaps some of the resistance is this idea that, hey, I love my husband, or I'm a happy wife, even though intellectually I can see some of the things that are problematic. So I guess perhaps maybe we need to give ourselves permission to live in the gray and, fit wherever we do on the spectrum.
Yeah, exactly. And also there's no one way to parent and there's no one way to be a feminist, right? We have ecofeminism, socialist feminism, post-colonial feminism, liberal feminism. There are so many different streams of thought And it's also important to distinguish between feminism as theory and as philosophical thought and feminism as practice.
And having said that, at the heart of it still is this idea that there's kindness, compassion, and equality or fairness informs all ideas of feminism and obviously parenting too. So there are some things perhaps that we can all relate to and all look for when we say we're being feminist parents.
I think that what you mentioned about living in the gray is really, really important because we live in a world that feels like it's all or nothing, right? So you're either all in or you're all out. And the same thing goes for motherhood, right? So you want to be the perfect mother, whatever that looks like, or you want to be the perfect feminist, whatever that looks like. But sometimes it's also important to create a space to just be good enough, right? And so just work on your imperfections, but doing something, right? And doing it well enough. And I'm really hoping that the kind of spaces and the kind of conversations that we have do open up and create that space that's more welcoming towards living in the gray, like you said.
And the very idea of motherhood, I think the biggest myth perpetuated by the patriarchy is motherhood is this singular, monolithic, only joyous, warm, fuzzy hallmarks and Archies experience for women. And somehow it's sort of this our biological destiny. It's, it's sort of the resolution of all our existential angst. And it is warm and fuzzy in parts and deeply joyous, or, this portal to big love in our lives, but it's messy and complex and hard and
oftentimes miserable.
Yeah, miserable, right? And it takes becoming a mother to realize how much our mothers were winging it, and it's quite alarming to sort of that sudden ushering into adulthood, where you realize, God, do any of us know what we're doing?
No, we do not. I also always try to make a very clear distinction between motherhood and mothering. Right? So we have mothering as practice. It's your day-to-day taking care of your child, living your life and all of that stuff. And then you have motherhood, which is this institution, which is this cultural, historical, socioeconomical thing that just exists, and that it's like no one will ever be able to attain that level of perfect motherhood, but it's just kind of continuously over our heads, hanging over our heads.
Right. And on all these Insta pages, these, mothers with wonderfully happy toddlers with perfectly white sheets. And I just think, I don't know how you're managing this, but that's not how our home looks at all.
Now, it's also, I think, important to take a step back from motherhood and look at parenthood, right? Because we also do not want to pigeonhole ourselves into this idea that women, and also nota bene, when we say women, we mean all women, right? We do not just mean cis women of reproductive age or whatever, we mean all women. But we do want to take a kind of a broader approach to caregiving and look at broader communities of care through a feminist lens. So in your own motherhood or mothering rather journey, what are some ways that you have been applying the feminist lens to your daily practice?
I keep reminding myself that so much of activism, it's the pause, is the resistance, is the negotiation. And I think for me, the biggest thing, of course, has been, I knew this already, Tena, the division of labor in our household. And, my husband and I worked outside the home, paid work outside the home, equal number of years. We've been parents the equal number of days. And yet the fact is, I am the expert on the baby. And, despite being a very doting and loving father, he will still say, where are the hats? Or does she use sunscreen when she's going out of the house? Or I think that comes with this assumption that as the mother, I am naturally, biologically better at, I have some kind of innate competence to know this about the baby. And I actually find that deeply problematic. And it isn't just about how it impacts our personal relationships. It's also what it means, on a larger scale outside the home. What does it mean for our careers? What does it mean, for our larger systems, that women are expected to carry the burden of all the unpaid labor and emotional labor.
And what does it mean for our children to see that, right? Regardless if we're mothers of, or rather parents of girls or parents of boys, regardless whether or not our children are going to be entering heterosexual relationships or not, we're still modeling very deeply rooted gender norms and roles within our own household. And we've known throughout the feminist history and feminist revolutions and waves and whatnot, we cannot have equality if we do not have equality at home. And I think that globally, and obviously I'm not Indian, so I'm not only focusing on the Indian context itself, but rather globally, this is something that we are so far back, so much further back that when it comes to public space equality, marketplace equality, and so on. The household really is kind of the last stronghold of these deeply rooted gender norms and roles.
Absolutely. And it informs so much about our political landscape, right? I mean, the WHO tells you that you should, for 6 months exclusively breastfeed your baby. Think of how much maternity, there's 180 days of maternity leave in India. Do the math. So are women having, working till the very minute they're having babies? Are they going back to work the instant they stop breastfeeding? It doesn't add up. Yeah. And we need systems in place that are actually supporting mothers. And in fact, one of the things that, I often find myself thinking, perhaps in like very self-indulgent ways, is who's taking care of the mother, who's taking care of the baby.
Yeah, that's a very, very important point. But those policies will not come into place until there's value put on the invisible and unpaid labor, right? And this is something that we talk about a lot, is making the invisible visible and quantifying, even within your own home, what is the actual unpaid labor. When I went back to my first workshop after I had my son was 3 months old, and I was sitting in a meeting. And mind you, in Croatia, we have a 1-year maternity leave. So I should not even be in a meeting at 3 months. Yeah, neither complaining nor being in a meeting at 3 months. And this guy who was in a meeting with me, I was asking everyone, how was your weekend? And I said, oh, well, every day is the same to me. What is weekend, right? When you have a newborn. And he was like, haha, yes, to Tena, every day is a weekend. No. It's exactly the opposite of that, right? You come back from your maternity leave and people ask you, how was your vacation, right? Because all of this labor just goes unnoticed, unappreciated, and unquantified.
Right. And it's definitely, any woman will tell you, perhaps the hardest time of our lives. And anybody who decided to call postpartum a maternity break, in quotes, had a very wicked sense of humor. In fact, I was at a leadership retreat for work recently, and I was gone for all of 24 hours. And of course, with like my heart in my mouth and the whole day planned, I realized at any given minute of the day that I was sitting in a different city, I knew what my daughter would be up to. And I knew what food was being made. I knew what time, the help would come. I mean, maybe I was physically in another place, but I carried all the mental load of what it meant to run the house. And of course, I came back to, my family sort of wanting to give my husband a standing ovation for just being so such a supportive spouse, such a wonderful father. And there is something here around what is visible and what is invisible, and how we valorize stepping outside our comfort zones.
But we also think there's something about taking on too much without giving, if you're parenting with a partner, without giving your partner the actual time and space to explore what parenting means for them, what fathering means for them, without becoming the expert in the baby, right? Like you said, we have been parents for the equal number of hours, right? My husband and I. But it's still very, very difficult to break away from this idea that I'm the expert on the baby.
I don't know if it's encoded in our DNA from millennia of socializing, the idea of the mom guilt, this sense of my value and worth as a mother is so directly proportional to how the baby is doing. And I think what it does is often makes women take on not just more than they need to for the child, but also sort of give up more than they need to for their own lives in ways that aren't asked of them.
So I've had horrendous postpartum depression, and one of the ways that it has manifested itself for very long after all of the other symptoms were cured was the mom guilt. And this is where actually my feminist practice and the feminist lens came in very handy for me, because when I applied the feminist lens to the mother guilt, I realized that guilt is inherently very unfeminist of me, right? I should really, if I am embodying the values of my feminist theory and all of those things that we learn and talk about, I really do need to look at it through that lens as well and realize that firstly, what am I showing to my child? The one thing that I'm showing to my child is that women in your life will stretch themselves thin to make your life more comfortable, while we do not necessarily expect the men in your life to do the same thing. And this is something that you and I always talk about, right? What is the most difficult probably act of feminist rebellion within the household? Taking a nap.
Right, yeah. Hanging out. Yeah, not having a plan. Right.
And there's this whole topic about, we have seen our mothers do it all, right? We've seen our mothers work outside of the house. And you and I will always say that there's no such thing as a non-working mother, right? Every mother is a working mother. But what we have never seen is a relaxed mother, right? A woman at leisure is still such a radical concept within the household that's not just scrambling around, oh, there's only 2 more things to pick up from the floor, there's only 1 more meal to manage or to cook, but really a woman or a mother or a parent who is just doing nothing.
Absolutely. And I think, so much of this is what about the voices in our head that we grew up with? Also, what about the voices around us? None of us are parenting in a vacuum. We all have, in-laws and parents. And I think what's really interesting when it comes to children, particularly babies, is it's everybody's prerogative. When it comes to having opinions, everybody feels like this is a collective act and we're all a village giving advice on how to raise the baby. And so much of what our mother's generation carried then is handed down to us, which is deeply problematic and fully unnecessary. And resisting that is hard work.
And this brings us to the topic that I always kind of feel passionate about. And that is that patriarchy would not have survived for centuries and millennia if 51% of the world's population was actively against it, right? We have to look into a mirror and recognize that women are also upholders of patriarchy. And what this looks like on a household level is that for centuries, the only arena of power that women had was the household, right? It was the nursery and the kitchen. That was your arena of power. So we still hold this idea that this is my area, right? This is where I have power, where I can exercise power. And this is where you see a lot of this mother-in-law, our mother's generation, grandmother's generation, almost carrying it like a badge of pride. I did everything by myself. I changed every single diaper by myself. I never feel like this is something to celebrate. I always feel like, well, I feel sorry for you. I feel sad that you had to do it alone.
And I often think there's so much unhealed trauma in that generation that manifests in these sort of either judgments of other, younger moms or the prescriptive sort of advice that they hand down. Where are the spaces women were grieving? Where were the spaces they were collectively coming together to talk about things? If motherhood was only this amazing thing to happen to you, then surely you couldn't be like, oh, this stuff is hard, or today I'm just not feeling it. When that didn't happen, so much of this grief then manifests maybe a generation later. How much of it is triggering for them to go through that again vicariously?
So there's also a lot of intragenerational empathy, I think, that we also have to carry. Because a lot of times, I think what kind of maybe scares people off from the F word and the feminist lens and the feminist approach is nobody necessarily wants to burn bridges, right? It is about still parenting within these wider structures of care that carry such important cultural role, historical role, ritualistic role even within the society. So no one really wants to like, okay, I'm off to the woods now to raise my child however I want to.
Absolutely. And we'll only get that together, right? Like this means something if we can reach, a place of more healing, more love, more compassion as a society. This isn't about, sorry, you just, like cut and run. That's not what we're aiming for here. Having said that, I fully know of instances that perhaps that's necessary. For example, when it comes to, consent and what that means in Indian families, and particularly large extended families where you're growing up with perhaps minimal supervision and have been in unsafe situations.
So I think I get away with quite a few more things because I'm not Indian. So I can kind of within my wider Indian family structure get away with more of my feminist protest and so on. But for those of us who are really parenting within the wider structures within the Indian context, what are some like practical strategies and ways that we can teach other people within our wider communities the vocabulary that we are using for raising our children with a feminist angle?
I really like, my big dream for our kids' generation is that we all learn from how we grew up, and they have words for body parts. For example, it's not PP, it's a penis. So they recognize when, or have the ability to communicate with you when they feel like they're violated. There's also this idea of like, oh, come go give auntie a kiss, or like, come let me pull your cheeks. And I think, and I I feel like I have to be the bad guy for my kid if that's what it's going to take, if she's not comfortable with something. And, my little one is a very sassy, independent child who does not like being, no affection unless is asked for is tolerated. And I absolutely love that about her, because it makes me feel like, okay, good. I'm glad you have boundaries that are clear. I keep telling people, don't say, give me a kiss. I say, would you like to give me a hug? And ask for her permission.
Consent is something that can be taught literally from day one. This idea that your body is yours and it belongs solely to you can be taught and practiced from the first diaper you change, right? From the first diaper I've changed, I was saying, can I change your diaper now? This is what's happening. We're going to change your diaper. I'm going to wipe your penis. I'm going to wipe your bum. And actually, a lot of people who were seeing this started laughing, and they were like, oh, Tena, what are you going to do if he tells you no? When he's 6 months, he says, no, I don't want you changing my diaper. So there's also this very fine balance of teaching children, your body is yours, it belongs to you. I also have to respect it, but there are certain situations in which an adult that loves and cares for you has to override your bodily autonomy. Such as, if we're going on a bicycle ride, you have to wear a helmet for your safety. Even if you don't want to, you have to get your shot when you go for your vaccines, right? But there are still ways of doing it extremely respectfully. And what I personally, this is my pet peeve, is when I see people treating children not as human beings, right? Because all human beings are inherently worthy of respect. You would expect respect and you would give it to other people. But for some reason, children are like this communal property that can just go around being passed from hand to hand until they start crying that they inevitably go back to the mom.
Right. And I get that it's not always easy to do, right? And I mean, both our kids are toddlers now, and they have very strong opinions and very little information about the world, which just makes for a very dangerous combination. But you're right. I think no matter how young they are, children have a very clear sense of what feels okay to them. And in fact, we haven't pierced our daughter's ears. I just felt like it was a big, irreversible thing to do. She was getting enough jabs and vaccines when she was really small. It didn't feel like, here's another poke for you, absolutely for no reason other than aesthetics and because, you're born a girl. Given how she's growing up, I suspect it's a matter of time till she asks us for it because she loves to dress up. But the amount of criticism, we faced for not piercing our daughter's ear, there is this sense of we have to indoctrinate and socialize them as early as possible. This is, the pinks and the blues. And if you're a girl, you're like this. And if you're a boy, you're like that. And I think some of feminist parenting is also resisting that and letting kids have the space to figure out what they are and how they want to be in the world.
And little boys are punished a lot more harshly by the society at large for stepping outside of the binary box, right? When little girls are, and I hate the word, tomboyish, because there's no such thing as a tom girl, right? You can only be a tomboyish. That's something to be celebrated. Look how brave she is. She's so adventurous. She's doing all these things that we associate with traditionally masculine roles. But when a boy does things that are considered traditionally feminine, quote unquote, they are being punished from their peers, wider families, nannies in the playground, other children in the playground, random uncles and aunties in the park, because we still see femininity as inherently less than. So masculinity is something to be celebrated, but femininity is still something that is inherently less than. Hence, the boys who dare to step out of those gender boxes are going to be punished a lot more harshly.
And I think as feminist parents, there's also sort of having to lean in or embrace being the, that voice in the room, because it's so easy to just go with the flow. It's just so easy to say, oh, just leave it, or you pick your battles, or, this is not the hill I want to die on today. But I also think hurt people, and patriarchy hurts people. Whether you are a boy or girl, or a man or a woman, there is something to be gained from the quiet resistance at your pace, in your comfort zone. But I think maybe it's okay for us to hold this up as an example for others, to speak up in our wider families, to sort of let our kids, give them the space to figure out their gender and their sexuality, what have you.
And this brings us back to the difficult part, right? And that is, we all reach adulthood as fully formed people with our own internalized biases, with our own internalized ideas about the world around us. To do all of this work requires work, right? It's a constant education. So even when we talk about figuring out your gender identity, right, that automatically means that we are acknowledging the fact that gender is not binary, that gender is a social construct, that people fall somewhere on the spectrum of gender. This is all the vocabulary and the learning that our parents did not have, that we maybe did not have until 5 years ago, right? And this is us who are working within this space. It's a constant educating yourself, questioning yourself. When my son was 6 weeks old, he was crying, as 6 weeks old do, and my immediate response was to tell him, "You're a big boy, don't cry." So if this is coming out of my mouth without me even thinking about it, and this is my life's work, then imagine how it is for an average person who is not thinking about gender, who is not thinking about patriarchal structures.
And also, it takes so much healing. I don't think any parent wakes up and says, today I'm going to screw you up a little bit, or, let's just setting you up for therapy in 18 years' time. But I just think it's, what are the ways in which, what are our own blind spots? What are the things we are carrying that we're still hurting from? And how can we heal those in ways that we're not passing them down to our children? Because so much of the baggage is just our own unhealed, childhood wounds.
Yeah, you always bring this very interesting angle of empathy towards ourselves and towards the societies at large that I really do appreciate, because it makes it feel like a more welcoming space for everyone to be in.
I think of I don't know, I think my daughter was maybe 2 months old when my mother said, "Oh, she's, I really worry about her nose. She's otherwise so beautiful." And I remember being aghast that anyone can look at an infant. And I love my mother very much. But that made me pause and think, hey, wait a minute, that's how I grew up. I think I heard some version of how to equate my physical appearance with my worth my whole life. And I had this sort of very strong sense of, no, this stops with me. And this isn't going to, pass down to her. And I think it's that. I think to me, that's feminist parenting in action. It's being that boundary for your child till they're old enough to hold their own boundaries. So all of this isn't just getting sort of, doled out to them from a young age.
It's also because we live, and so by extension parent, at this weird, insidious intersection of late-stage capitalism and patriarchy, right? So you have all this patriarchal nonsense that's being passed down from generations and through all these structures. And then you have these late-stage capitalistic systems who benefit from that, because all these insecurities that we carry make us buy things. And so you're parenting at this very weird moment where you're trying to heal all of this unresolved trauma and all of this stuff that we carry down, but then you're also being told that the best way to heal all of these things is to buy all of these other things.
And that'll fix it. And also, how we're organized as a society, this binary of man, woman is just so fundamental. I can understand some of the resistance to it, because how scary it must be if you were operating from this was a given about the world, this was business as usual, and then somebody was suddenly saying that you had a choice, and what you thought was natural, biological, innate was actually conditioning or socializing. I can see how somebody would be like, you don't know what that's really scary. This isn't something I'm ready to confront at this point in my life.
And if your only role is to be a mother, and you have convinced yourself that you are a good mother based on all of these biological imperatives and based on the binary and based on the fact that there is no other option, right? This is your area of power. what does this do to your position within the wider social structure?
Absolutely. And I guess I often think stereotypes or even sort of fitting within existing, social mores is perhaps lazy, perhaps safer. But the other side to this, but it's also sort of a daily small pains that because none of us fully fit pigeonholes, none of us would ever neatly be able to organize our heads and our hearts around the boxes that have been handed to us. So perhaps maybe the draw can be that it's a more authentic, fuller, complexity is okay kind of living, and there's freedom in that. There's some degree of peace in that.
It's a death by 1,000 cuts, living tightly within the gender box or within any kind of binary box, within a patriarchal structure that you do not want to change because you do not want to rock the boat. But it comes at a high price, of a mental health price. And this is not a price that only women and gender minorities pay, right? It's a price that anybody who lives under the patriarchal structure, and that's all of us anywhere around the world, there is a price tag that comes with that. There's a price to your mental health. There's a price to your peace with yourself, your creativity, your expression. So just today we were talking about how by the age of 3, boys are actually more emotionally expressive than girls are by nature, right? Not nurture. And then something happens around the age of 3 when they start being less comfortable with exploring their emotions and expressing their emotions. And when I say something happens, what I mean is we happen. We as parents happen. We as parents happen, and a wider society happens because we start expressing different expectations of boys and girls, right? Even how we speak to them, how we play with them, how do we allow them to express their interests. So when we talk about patriarchy hurting and injuring people, we are not just talking about women and gender minorities. And it's very difficult to let go of the power that you have, right? It's very difficult to let go of the perceived privilege that you have. But you have to understand that you, as a person who holds that power and privilege, cannot live a full, fulfilling, emotionally rich life without letting that go.
I also think this idea that it's such a narrow look to think of entitlement as a privilege. I think anything that keeps us from pushing ourselves to this, exploring our fullest potential, I don't know how much of a privilege that is. I think I can think of people, paying a high price to, like we were saying, to fit inside that box. So I feel like patriarchal roles are as damaging for men, just in other ways. And I'm not even, again, we keep saying men, women, mothers, fathers. I want to acknowledge that that's not the only way, human beings identify or express themselves. And in all ways, it's this idea, like the categories are, supposed to make our life simpler, but then over time have just started carrying so much baggage and so much value and a differential in value that they're no longer useful in the ways that they were.
Yeah, I think that this is also where, going back to the beginning of the conversation, that there are multiple feminisms, right? There's no one feminism, just as there's no one way to parent. And on the spectrum of feminist thought, you and I probably don't always fall on the same parts of that spectrum, right? Be it through our theoretical approach, be it through our lived experience. And so when we're talking now about men and other genders as victims of patriarchy, there is also a very strong stream of feminist thought. It's like, well, who cares? Right? Like, who cares if patriarchy injures you? You're the ones who are upholding it. So like we say, there is multitude of angles of looking at, because these are extremely complex problems that carry with them historical implications, political implications, cultural, socioeconomical, religious implications. So in 60 minutes or 45 minutes or 3 times 60 minutes, we cannot cover all of those different approaches, but maybe let's focus on a little bit of where we lie on the continuum when it comes to the lived experience and how that intersection of lived experience and theory shapes both of our parenting and our feminist parenting journeys.
It's funny, or it makes complete sense that you and I came together to do something, because, I often look at you as, the very evolved parents, this like amazingly career-driven mom, the very woke husband, and, and I see in you this very unapologetic stance on this is what is right and just, and this is what I will stand up for. And I think of myself as having come to feminism with like, ouch, this really hurts. Like all these patriarchal molds that I have grown up with. And often with people I care very deeply about and absolutely want to continue having in my life because, this is my family. But growing up in a large extended family, growing up with sort of actually like having to hear things like, girls should be seen and not heard. And not like as a joke or not ironically, this is what was said and was expected. So for me, I feel like I came to it because I thought this can't be it. Like there's got to be, there's more to this and I need to figure out what it is. And, then in some ways arriving at very similar places where we think it is about a more authentic, loving, compassionate way to be in the world. And like without sounding like a Miss India pageant, like to make the world a better place. I mean, there's plastic in the oceans. We're getting hotter by the minute. Like this is not, if we don't try to fix this now, then when?
I want to acknowledge something that you said about unapologetically going for what's right and so on. We can't do anything until we take a long, hard look at ourselves and be realistic with where we're coming from, what our positioning in this world is, where are we situated within the society and so on. And so if it seems like for me, it's maybe easier to take certain stances and so on, it's because it comes at a less of a social cost, right? And this is what we always come back to. When we say choose your battles or don't choose your battles, right? Burn on every hill, burn every bridge. It doesn't matter. But you have to understand what the social cost to you is, right? You want to maintain relationships with your family members. You know that you will be penalized either within the home or within the marketplace if you hold certain opinions and voice them out loud. So a lot of these feminist struggles have to come with personal safety, be it physical, emotional, or mental, right? We need to think about that self-preservation aspect as well. It can't always be, for some people it can, but usually it can't just always be all guns blazing. We still live within the real world, right? We still want to maintain these relationships. We still want to teach our children, and I'm really bad at this, that you can be friends with people that you disagree with, right? I'm personally bad at this, but there has to be space for holding things in tension and having dialogue. There has to be that space.
In fact, I feel like that's why feminist parenting to me is really compelling, because it's almost more compelling than just feminism, right? Like I would be more willing and more patient to tolerate certain behaviors or things, being said to me than I would for my daughter, because I think just somehow that kind of the guns blazing you speak of, all of it comes out for her. And I don't think it's just personal. I do also think it's really political. I also feel like this is sort of our way of leaving a slightly better world behind for our kids. If nothing else, if we can make our homes a slightly safer space, and equip them before they go out in the big bad world. And we've modeled for them certain choices and behaviors and given them full permission to be themselves, then hopefully they'll be able to take that one step further.
And also when we talk about homes as safe spaces or even public spaces as safe spaces, a lot of the discourse in India, even legally, right, is around women and girls as victims of gender-based violence. So I just want to make it very clear here to all of the parents of children who are not girls that you cannot be complacent, right? Well, gender-based violence sexual violence does not only target girls and gender minorities. Statistically, we also know that this is a space of a lot of shame, a lot of power struggles and so on. So really this idea of, well, if I have a boy, then at least there's one thing I don't have to think about is unfortunately deeply fundamentally untrue.
You're right. In fact, when we didn't know if we were having a boy or girl, I remember thinking to myself, I hope it's a boy because it'll be a little bit easier to keep. I remember saying, I just have to make sure that he doesn't grow up to be an asshole. Like that's, if you have a girl, then there's all this you need to give her confidence, but maybe not overconfidence. You need to teach her how to stand up for herself, but also to pick which battles to fight. And now that I have a kid, I realize, no, it's all of it is.
I always tell Leo, you are really, really special and important. to me, but not to the rest of the world. you are you are really important, but only to me. The world, on the other hand, does not owe you anything.
Absolutely. And I think, God, for us, the big battle for the last month has been screen time, which I tried really hard to keep her away from. And Cocomelon has happened. And now it's just it doesn't matter how many books I've been trying to read to her and all the running and peekaboo playing that we're doing. And I think, wow, it's powerful. It does anything we're trying to do that's against the grain of what's around and the media and there's strong forces at work. So we need to really kind of gear up and hunker down and do this as best we can.
And give yourself credit, because it is hard and it is going against some very, very powerful forces internally and externally. So a lot of times we talk about feminist struggle, we talk about the fight, the protest, the rebuilding of the society, which are all extremely difficult and tasking things that come down to, in 90% of the cases, being another task on a woman's plate, right? I do think that what, for me, feminist parenting and applying this lens also does is it brings a lot of joy. And I do think that we need to celebrate that feminist joy and solidarity as well, because it really is not all doom and gloom. It's mostly doom and gloom, but it's not only doom and gloom.
But we're all holding hands and singing Kumbaya as we go down. No, I agree. And I think that's one of the things that sort of all the times that we've gathered together with other moms has been, it is this reinforcing of, this idea of women standing up for each other, the idea that there is something sort of common in all our experiences that really bolsters your sense of, I guess, or buffers you from the isolation you feel in early motherhood. And you're right, I just want to kind of echo what you were saying earlier about things on women's plate. I've been told very often how I need to make time for myself, for example, or go do this, and I just think, God, don't add self-care to my plate, my already full plate. Damn you, if you make this one more thing I am not doing enough of, or, need to somehow find in my...
But you remember what Bakul Dua said, our amazing therapist and psychologist, a colleague and friend. For some moms, self-care means saying yes. For some, it means saying no, right? And also what we're now being sold as self-care, again, we're being sold as a product. It's the spa day, it's the facial, it's again ways to spend money, right? And sometimes the highest form of self-care, not sometimes, almost always, is just respecting your boundary and holding your boundary. And that does not require a visit to a salon.
And holding your time sacred, right? That isn't just always for other people. In fact, maybe what we could do in the next episode is talk a little just about what we've heard so much from the mums in our circles. What are the patterns or trends we've seen? I think some of it I could sort of, perhaps we could have called it. And some I feel like I've been surprised by.
Yes, exactly. There have been a lot of lessons learned from these communal spaces and communing with other parents, and not just moms standing up for moms, but also a lot of active and proactive allyship that we have seen, and just some of the wider lessons of this work and this life and this path that we are on.
Thank you for staying on for the full conversation. If you liked what you heard, please share it with family and friends. You can also leave us a review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. The crew that makes these podcasts possible are Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarvanaraj and Raghavendra Tenkaila. Artwork and design is by Chandani Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studios. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcenter.org. Do follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to get regular updates on our programming. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.